Emma Hartwell had the kind of life that would make a meditation guru weep with envy. Every morning at precisely 6:30, she'd water her prize-winning tomatoes, hum something classical, heal, and prepare for another thrilling day of organizing books on New Eden Colony. The locals knew her as that sweet librarian who always remembered their children's names and made the best Earl Grey this side of the Centauri belt. What they didn't know was that Emma arranged her kitchen knives by lethality coefficient rather than size. Or that her morning yoga routine included moves with names like Serenity Strike and Peaceful Throat Punch. The woman could kill a man with a bookmark, but she preferred to simply shush them into submission. Emma had spent 15 years as a military black ops specialist before deciding that retirement looked a lot better than another tour dodging plasma fire. She'd chosen New Eden specifically because it was boring. No strategic value, no rare minerals, just farmers and their families living quiet lives under a perfectly ordinary star. The kind of place where the most exciting event was the annual pie contest, and Emma had won 3 years running with her blueberry crumble. Her cottage sat on the edge of town, surrounded by a garden that would make any botanist suspicious. Sure, the roses were beautiful, but why did she need so many thorny hedges arranged in defensive perimeters? And those herbs weren't just for cooking either. Emma grew enough nightshade to put down a small army, though she told neighbors it was for pest control. The truth was, Emma had killed more aliens than most people had met. She'd earned 17 different medals, half of which were classified so high they didn't officially exist. Her military file was thicker than the colony's phone book and twice as deadly to read. But that was another life, one she'd buried deeper than her tomato roots. These days, Emma's biggest challenge was convincing old Mrs. Patterson that romance novels belonged in the fiction section, not historical documentation. Her most dangerous enemy was the library's ancient air conditioning unit, which made sounds like a dying whale every Tuesday. She'd replaced violence with gardening tips and weapons maintenance with book repairs. Every evening, Emma would sit on her porch with chamomile tea, watching New Eden's twin moons rise over fields of grain. She'd listen to the settlers' children playing in the distance and feel something she'd never experienced during her military years: peace. The kind of deep, bone-level contentment that came from knowing nobody was trying to kill you today. Her neighbors saw a woman who'd found her calling among the stacks and card catalogs. They'd wave and call out greetings, never suspecting that their mild-mannered librarian could recite 17 different ways to kill a man with library supplies. Emma preferred it that way. She'd had enough excitement for several lifetimes. The colony's security consisted of 3 part-time officers whose biggest concern was teenagers sneaking beer behind the grain silos. New Eden didn't need military protection, because nobody cared about a farming community in the middle of nowhere. It was exactly the kind of obscurity Emma had been looking for. But obscurity, like most good things in the universe, has an unfortunate tendency to end right when you're getting comfortable with it. The Kryllian Empire's diplomatic vessel dropped out of hyperspace with all the subtlety of a brick through a stained glass window. The ship looked like someone had crossbred a military cruiser with a gaudy casino, complete with gold plating and enough weapon ports to level a small city. It screamed, "We come in peace," the way a shark screams, "I'm just here for a friendly swim." Ambassador Vextar emerged from the ship looking like evolution's answer to the question, what if a crocodile went to law school? He stood 8 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted color based on his mood, which seemed permanently stuck on arrogant green. His entourage included enough security personnel to invade a planet, which was probably not a coincidence. The colony's mayor, a sweet man named Harold Pickering who'd never seen anything more threatening than a tax audit, welcomed the aliens with nervous enthusiasm. He'd arranged the meeting in the town hall, complete with his wife's good china and little sandwiches with the crusts cut off. It was like preparing for a PTA meeting with nuclear-armed velociraptors. Emma watched from the back of the hall, trying to blend into the wallpaper while every instinct screamed at her to start calculating exit routes and weapon improvisation opportunities. She'd recognized Kryllian military hardware the moment it landed, and Ambassador Vextar's diplomatic immunity. Badge was doing a poor job of hiding the plasma cannon built into his ceremonial armor. "Humans of New Eden," Vextar announced, his voice carrying the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining colors to the colorblind. "The Kryllian Empire requires your cooperation in matters of galactic importance." Mayor Pickering nodded eagerly, probably thinking this was about trade agreements or cultural exchange programs. Poor Harold had never learned that when aliens use the word requires, they usually mean demands at gunpoint. Your world sits atop valuable deposits of crystallized lithium, Vextar continued, which the Empire needs for our expansion efforts. We are prepared to offer you relocation to a suitable agricultural world in exchange for mining rights. Emma felt her jaw clench. She'd heard this song before. The Kryllians were notorious for their definition of suitable agricultural world, which typically meant barren rock with an atmosphere you can technically breathe if you don't mind the sulfur. Mayor Pickering's smile faltered. Well, Ambassador, this is our home. Perhaps we could discuss some kind of partnership arrangement? Vextar's scales shifted to what Emma recognized as patronizing yellow. I fear you misunderstand, Mayor Pickering. This is not a negotiation. The Empire has generously decided to compensate you rather than simply taking what we need. You have 72 hours to accept our offer. Several colonists started objecting, their voices rising with the kind of panic that comes from realizing you're about to lose everything you've built. Vextar's security detail helpfully demonstrated their understanding of crowd control, by activating their weapons and taking aim at the nearest families. Emma watched a Kryllian soldier grab Mrs. Patterson by the arm, and something cold and familiar stirred in her chest. She'd spent 5 years learning to ignore that feeling, but retirement apparently hadn't killed it, just put it in hibernation. 72 hours, Vextar repeated, his scales now flashing the red that meant compliance or consequences. We suggest you use that time wisely. The Empire's generosity has limits. The aliens filed out, leaving behind the kind of silence that follows natural disasters and tax audits. Mayor Pickering slumped in his chair, looking like a man who'd just discovered his insurance didn't cover alien invasion. Emma slipped out through the back door, her mind already shifting into patterns she'd hoped never to use again. She walked home slowly, noting security camera positions and calculating fields of fire, while her neighbors worried about packing and evacuation routes. That evening, as she tended her garden under the rising moons, Emma made a decision. She'd found peace on New Eden, and she wasn't about to let some overgrown lizards with delusions of grandeur take it away. The Kryllians had made one critical error in their intelligence gathering. They'd assumed that a quiet farming colony would be populated entirely by quiet farmers. The Deathfangs arrived at Emma's cottage just after midnight, because apparently evil aliens had never heard of normal business hours. They were the Kryllian Empire's elite assassination squad, trained from birth to kill quietly and efficiently. Their reputation was so fearsome that entire star systems had surrendered rather than face them in combat. Unfortunately for them, nobody had bothered to update their intelligence files with Emma's actual background. The squad leader, a particularly nasty specimen named Racktooth, had done his homework on Emma Hartwell. 34 years old, single, worked at the local library, grew tomatoes as a hobby. No military service, no combat training, no weapons permits. The kind of soft human who would probably faint at the sight of blood. What Racktooth's files didn't mention was Emma's 15-year career as the gardener, or her habit of sleeping with a plasma knife under her pillow and motion sensors throughout her house, details that might have been useful when planning a stealth infiltration. Emma felt the perimeter alarms through her neural implant while the Deathfangs were still creeping through her prize-winning roses. She lay in bed for exactly 30 seconds, calculating their positions and probable infiltration routes, before rolling silently to her feet. Old habits die hard, and Emma's habits had been professionally lethal. The first Deathfang made it as far as her kitchen window before learning that Emma's herb garden included more than basil and oregano. The motion-activated spore dispensers she'd installed as pest control released a cloud of concentrated nightshade extract that dropped him faster than a bad pickup line. His teammates found him 10 minutes later, unconscious and covered in what looked like pollen but smelled like justice. Racktooth decided to abandon stealth in favor of direct confrontation. He kicked in Emma's front door and stormed into her living room, expecting to find a terrified librarian cowering behind her couch. Instead, he found Emma standing calmly by her bookshelf, wearing a floral nightgown and holding a cup of tea. "Excuse me," she said in the same polite tone she used for overdue book notices, "but do you have a library card? Because I'm afraid this is a private residence, and the library doesn't open until 9. Racktooth snarled, revealing teeth that could open cans and had probably done so. "Emma Hartwell, you have been selected for termination as an example to your species. Prepare to—" "Oh, how rude of me," Emma interrupted, setting down her teacup with practiced precision. "I haven't introduced myself properly. My name is Emma Hartwell, and I'm the head librarian here on New Eden. I specialize in information management, organizational systems, and pest control." She picked up a book from the nearby table, a leather-bound volume on botanical toxins, and smiled the kind of smile that kindergarten teachers use right before calling parents. "The thing about pest control," Emma continued, "is that you have to understand your target species. Take Kryllian death fangs, for example. Highly trained, exceptionally arrogant, and absolutely convinced that humans are inferior prey." Racktooth raised his plasma rifle, but Emma was already moving. 15 years of retirement hadn't slowed her down nearly as much as the death fangs had hoped. She threw the book with the precision of a guided missile, catching Racktooth square in his weapon's targeting sensor. The rifle discharged into her ceiling, leaving a smoking hole where her favorite light fixture used to be. "Now that," Emma said, producing a letter opener from somewhere in her nightgown, "is going to require some serious repair work. And I just had the wiring updated." Racktooth had exactly enough time to wonder how a human librarian moved like liquid death before Emma introduced him to the business end of her correspondence supplies. The letter opener wasn't designed for combat, but Emma had always believed in making do with available resources. The remaining death fangs, hearing their leader's rather undignified screams, decided that the direct approach needed more firepower. They stormed the cottage in formation, ready to overwhelm one small human with superior numbers and advanced weaponry. They were about to learn that Emma's definition of library science included some very practical applications. The second wave of death fangs burst through Emma's cottage like they were raiding a terrorist stronghold, which was actually closer to the truth than they realized. Emma had spent her retirement years turning her home into the kind of cozy death trap that would make a military engineer weep with professional jealousy. "Welcome to my library," Emma announced from somewhere in the maze of bookshelves she'd installed throughout her living space. "Please keep your voices down and mind the organizational system." The death fang named Zekmar spotted movement between the philosophy and poetry sections and opened fire. His plasma bolts vaporized 3 volumes of Shakespearean sonnets and 1 unfortunate collection of haikus, but Emma had already relocated to the reference section. She popped up behind a display of gardening manuals and launched a hardcover copy of Advanced Botany with the precision of an artillery strike. The book caught Zekmar in his primary optical organ, and while he was stumbling around blind, Emma introduced him to her card catalog system. The old-fashioned wooden drawers were perfect for storing index cards, library stamps, and apparently the heads of overconfident assassins. Zekmar's muffled protests were efficiently silenced by several thousand alphabetized entries on agricultural techniques. "Shush," Emma whispered, because even during a home invasion, proper library etiquette was important. The remaining 3 death fangs tried to coordinate their attack, but Emma's cottage had been designed by someone who understood that the best defense was a really creative offense. The bookshelves were mounted on rails, allowing them to slide and reconfigure like a literary labyrinth. What looked like a cozy reading nook could become a kill corridor in seconds. Deathfang Crow next found himself trapped between medieval history and modern romance when the shelves suddenly contracted. Emma appeared above him like a librarian spider, rappelling down from the ceiling on what looked suspiciously like repurposed book-binding cord. "Did you know," she said conversationally while applying a chokehold that would have made her drill instructors proud, "that the average human reads about 12 books per year? Of course, that statistic doesn't include educational materials or professional development resources." Crow next tried to respond, but it's difficult to engage in philosophical discussion when someone is systematically cutting off your air supply with techniques learned in advanced interrogation training. Emma waited until his struggles subsided before continuing her impromptu lecture. The thing about libraries is that they're really just information storage and retrieval systems. Very similar to military intelligence databases, actually. Same organizational principles, same emphasis on efficiency and accuracy. She released Crow necks and stepped over his unconscious form, adjusting her nightgown with the casual air of someone who'd just helped a patron find the bathroom rather than neutralized a professional killer. The final 2 death fangs had barricaded themselves behind Emma's reading table, which was made from genuine earth oak and thick enough to stop most small arms fire. They were rapidly discovering that furniture designed by a paranoid ex-military specialist tended to have certain defensive capabilities built in. "This is taking much longer than I'd planned," Emma called out, checking the antique grandfather clock she'd inherited from her grandmother. "I have to open the library at 9, and I still need to catalog yesterday's returns." She picked up a snow globe from her mantelpiece, a souvenir from her last vacation to Luna City, and hurled it with the kind of precision that comes from years of throwing grenades under pressure. It shattered against the wall above the Death Fang's position, releasing what they initially mistook for decorative snow. 10 seconds later, they realized their error. Emma's snow globe contained crystallized sleep agent mixed with microscopic glass particles, a combination that was both artistically beautiful and functionally devastating. The Death Fangs managed exactly 3 more plasma shots before succumbing to what Emma cheerfully called her Winter Wonderland special. Emma surveyed the wreckage of her living room with the resigned expression of someone whose home insurance definitely didn't cover alien assassination attempts. Her bookshelves would need reorganizing. Several rare first editions were now rare first edition ashes, and there was definitely going to be some awkward explaining to do when the cleaning service arrived. But her tomatoes were unharmed, her tea was still warm, and the Death Fangs were experiencing the kind of educational experience that came from underestimating librarians with advanced military training. "Well," Emma said, stepping over unconscious aliens while making mental notes about carpet cleaning services, "I suppose I should call this in to the authorities. Though I imagine Mayor Pickering is going to need some very strong coffee when he gets this report." She paused at her communication console, then smiled the kind of smile that had once struck fear into the hearts of enemy commanders across 3 star systems. "Actually, I think Ambassador Vex Tar deserves a personal update on his diplomatic mission's progress. Professional courtesy, you might say." Ambassador Vex Tar was enjoying his morning ritual of intimidating subordinates and reviewing invasion plans when his personal communicator chimed with an urgent message from the Death Fangs. He'd been expecting a brief status report confirming the elimination of that insignificant human librarian, possibly accompanied by some grisly photographs for the intimidation files. Instead, he received a video call from Emma Hartwell herself. "Good morning, Ambassador," Emma said pleasantly, adjusting the camera to show her sitting at what appeared to be her kitchen table. Behind her, Vex Tar could make out shapes that looked suspiciously like unconscious Kryllian commandos arranged in neat rows. "I hope I'm not calling it an inconvenient time." Vex Tar's scales shifted through several shades of confusion before settling on alarmed orange. "How did you obtain this communication frequency? Where are my soldiers?" "Oh, they're here," Emma replied, gesturing vaguely toward the background. "We had a lovely chat about proper library etiquette and the importance of making appointments before visiting. They're resting now, very deeply." The ambassador leaned forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing as he tried to process what he was seeing. "You are merely a librarian, a soft human with no military training or combat experience." Emma's smile took on the quality of winter sunlight, bright, beautiful, and absolutely freezing. "You know, that's exactly what your intelligence files said. Quite comprehensive, really. Very thorough biographical data, psychological profiles, daily routine observations. Someone put a lot of work into that research." She reached off camera and produced a data pad covered in Kryllian military markings. "The only problem with intelligence gathering is that it's only as good as your sources. And your sources, Ambassador, seem to have missed some rather important details about my background." Vex Tar felt something cold and unfamiliar crawling up his spine. In all his years as a diplomatic representative of the Kryllian Empire, he'd never encountered a human who looked at him with such calm, professional assessment. It was the kind of look predators gave prey just before the feeding began. "Allow me to properly introduce myself," Emma continued, her voice maintaining its librarian politeness while her eyes went absolutely arctic. "My name is Emma Hartwell, and until 5 years ago I was better known in certain military circles as the Gardener. Perhaps your intelligence division has heard that name?" They had. Vextar's scales went dead white, the Kryllian equivalent of a human turning green and reaching for the nearest bathroom. The Gardener was a legend whispered about in the darkest corners of alien military intelligence. A human operative so effective, so ruthlessly creative in her methods, that entire enemy units would surrender rather than face her in combat. "Impossible," Vextar whispered. "The Gardener disappeared years ago, presumed dead after the Centauri campaign. Retired, actually," Emma corrected. "I found a lovely little colony where I could pursue my hobbies in peace. Gardening, reading, organizing information systems. You know how it is when you want to start a new chapter in your life." She stood up, and for the first time, Vextar noticed that Emma's floral nightgown was accessorized with what appeared to be Kryllian military hardware. A plasma rifle hung across her back like a purse strap, and her gardening belt now held items that definitely weren't designed for pruning roses. "The thing is, Ambassador, I really like my quiet life here on New Eden. I like my neighbors, my library, my tomatoes. And when someone threatens those things, well, I tend to revert to old habits." Emma walked toward her front door, the camera following her movement. "I assume you're planning to leave our little colony now that your diplomatic mission has encountered some unexpected complications?" "The Kryllian Empire does not negotiate with terrorists," Vextar managed, though his voice cracked slightly on the word terrorists. Emma paused with her hand on the door handle. "Oh, Ambassador, I think you misunderstand. I'm not negotiating with you. I'm not making demands or issuing ultimatums. I'm simply explaining the new reality of your situation." She opened the door and stepped outside, revealing the pre-dawn darkness of New Eden's countryside. In the distance, the lights of the Kryllian diplomatic vessel twinkled like stars, completely unaware of what was walking toward them through the morning mist. "You see, the Kryllian Empire made a fundamental error in judgment when they decided to threaten my home," Emma continued, her voice maintaining its pleasant, conversational tone while she began walking toward the spaceport. "You assumed that humanity's peaceful colonies were populated entirely by peaceful humans." Vextar watched in growing horror as the most dangerous human in recent military history strolled through the countryside like she was taking a morning constitutional, rather than planning what was undoubtedly going to be a diplomatic incident of galactic proportions. "I suggest you prepare for immediate departure, Ambassador," Emma said. "I'll be arriving at your ship in approximately 15 minutes, and I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings about your continued presence in our solar system." The communication ended, leaving Vextar staring at a blank screen while his mind raced through rapidly diminishing options. He could call for military backup, but that would take hours to arrive. He could try to negotiate, but the Gardener had never been known for her diplomatic flexibility. He could attempt to flee immediately, but abandoning a diplomatic mission would destroy his career. Or he could stay and face whatever creative solutions the Gardener had in mind for resolving their diplomatic differences. Vextar began ordering immediate departure preparations while trying to calculate whether his ship's engines could achieve escape velocity, before a retired librarian arrived to discuss proper checkout procedures for borrowed planets. 3 weeks later, Emma was back to her regular routine of organizing books, helping children with school projects, and pretending that the scorch marks on her cottage walls were from a particularly aggressive barbecue accident. The official story, according to Mayor Pickering's carefully worded report to the Colonial Authority, was that the Kryllian diplomatic mission had ended amicably with a mutual agreement to pursue alternative resource acquisition strategies. The unofficial story, whispered over coffee and passed along through social media, was that Ambassador Vextar had left New Eden's orbit so quickly that his ship's engines had left a trail visible from 3 star systems away. Rumor suggested that the Kryllian Empire's expansion committee had suddenly discovered urgent business in the opposite direction of human space and that several high-ranking military officials had submitted requests for reassignment to desk jobs in the safest, most remote sectors they could find. Emma found these rumors mildly amusing while she restocked the library's science fiction section, though she did make a mental note to order several new copies of military strategy guides to replace the ones she'd used as improvised weapons. The insurance company had been surprisingly accommodating about her claim, possibly because their investigator had taken one look at the crater where her living room used to be and decided that some questions were better left unasked. "Miss Emma," called young Tommy Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's grandson, as he returned a stack of adventure novels. "My grandmother says you're a hero for standing up to those mean aliens." Emma smiled and stamped his returned books with the kind of gentle precision she'd once applied to much more final paperwork. "I just did what any good neighbor would do, Tommy. Sometimes you have to remind people about proper community standards." The truth was slightly more complicated. Emma had indeed reminded Ambassador Vex Tar about community standards, though her methods had been more direct than most neighborhood watch programs typically employed. By the time she'd finished her educational demonstration at the spaceport, the Kryllian diplomatic vessel had been eager to depart New Eden and explore literally any other corner of the galaxy. The Galactic news networks had picked up the story within days, and though their reporting focused more on the mysterious withdrawal of Kryllian forces than on the specific details of what had caused such a dramatic change in Empire policy. Several military analysts noted that the Kryllians' sudden interest in peaceful resource sharing seemed to coincide with reports of unusual energy signatures near New Eden, but nobody could quite explain the connection. Emma's former military contacts had been more direct in their communications. Her old commanding officer had sent a brief message consisting entirely of a single emoji, a smiling face with sunglasses and a caption reading "Retirement suits you." Her former squad mates had been slightly more verbose, with comments ranging from "always knew you couldn't stay out of trouble" to "next time save some fun for the rest of us." The Colonial Defense Force had also reached out, ostensibly to conduct a routine follow-up interview about the diplomatic incident. Emma had politely declined their invitation to discuss career opportunities, and suggested they focus their recruitment efforts on people who hadn't already served their time in the galaxy's most dangerous profession. These days, Emma's biggest excitement came from the annual New Eden Harvest Festival, where her prize-winning tomatoes continued their impressive winning streak. She'd added a new greenhouse to her property, officially for expanding her vegetable garden, but unofficially because the structure's design included several defensive features that would make future unwelcome visitors think twice about their career choices. Mayor Pickering had offered to nominate Emma for a Civilian Service Award, but she'd politely suggested that the colony's gratitude was recognition enough. The last thing she wanted was more attention from galactic authorities who might start asking uncomfortable questions about her gardening techniques or library management strategies. Instead, Emma had requested that the town council invest in better communication systems and perhaps a few discreet early warning sensors, just in case other alien empires decided to test humanity's resolve. She'd also volunteered to help train the local security force in conflict de-escalation techniques, though her definition of de-escalation included several methods not typically taught in standard police academies. As the twin moons rose over New Eden's peaceful fields, Emma sat on her repaired porch with her evening tea, listening to the familiar sounds of a community going about its quiet business. Children played in distant yards, farmers discussed crop rotations, and the night air carried the scent of growing things and home cooking. Somewhere in the Galactic news feed, playing softly from her communication console, a reporter mentioned that the Kryllian Empire had announced a new policy of respectful cooperation with human colonial territories, though officials declined to comment on what had prompted this diplomatic evolution. Emma sipped her tea and smiled. Sometimes the best gardening involved knowing which weeds to pull and which pests needed a firm but educational discouragement. And sometimes the most effective library management meant ensuring that everyone understood the importance of returning borrowed items on time and respecting community property. She closed her eyes and listened to the peaceful sounds of New Eden settling in for another quiet night, secure in the knowledge that her neighbors could sleep safely while she kept watch over their little corner of the galaxy. After all, every good librarian knows that the most important part of the job is protecting the collection.